To highlight some of the negatives of the Triumph Sprint GT SE model. Mine's a 2016 model, as I say, it's the SE. Pretty much standard with a few extra little trimmy bits, but yeah, I haven't really messed about with it too much, so it's pretty much as it came out of the box. These are the points which really, yes, they're negatives. However, you get to a point where you pay your money, it takes your choice. But if we start really with the ergonomics of the bike, now the bike was an ST chassis stretched. Basically, I think the frame stretched, certainly the swinging arm was stretched, which gave her a longer wheelbase to accommodate more passenger room, and of course enhanced luggage space, etc., with the underslung exhaust. Obviously there have been some tweaks to the engine, all relatively minor stuff, bit of remapping, throttle bodies, exhaust, usual stuff, and the sixth gear has changed to be longer, more relaxed cruising. All in all, as a sort of design concept, I guess it was a good enough idea, but the bike was fairly out of time when they did it, so it's relative to its design age, if you like, and as a sports tourer, well, a grand tourer as they would term it, it is of course always going to be compromised, because you're not really doing a full-blown tourer such as the big 1200 they did, and it's not really a sports bike. For me, that concept works mainly in the I'm fairly tall, but I've retained a fair bit of flexibility, thankfully, at my age, but I do have a problem with very upright seating positions where I get a lot of lower back pain. Damaged my spine many years ago, and it's always been the way that every time I bought a sit-up bike, I thought, this is fantastic, until I rode it for a distance. And the slightly more inclined seating position of the sports touring bike, be it a VFR or the Triumph, as in this case, suits me much better. Of course, there's a bit of added wrist pressure, and you're always going to be compromised in terms of, nice wide handlebars on an explorer style bike, adventure style bike should I say, are always going to be, it's going to feel more perfect and more manageable, certainly when you've got a lot of weight as you have on the Triumph. As I said, for me, this concept suited me, and the bike was heavy, yes, but I came off of a Pan-European, which was one of the few upright bikes I found reasonably comfortable. It was significantly lighter than the Pan-European, but I found that a few issues which over time, and it's over years of ownership, are relevant, and sort of things you sort of think, yep, well, that is what it is, but it's always going to be a bugbear. Now, obviously on the forums you do see many people making extensive modifications, raised bars, suspension, brakes. Yeah, that people do spend an awful lot of money, and I fully understand that. I'm not knocking anybody for doing that, but for me, that would be a point of like, if I wanted raised bars, I'd buy a different style of motorcycle. If I wanted lower footrests, I get the same, I don't see for me, the motivation to sort of make drastic changes to a production motorcycle just to try and fit it into a class which is really already present in other models or manufacturers. So if we look at the riding position generally, the handlebars on the GT raised from the ST, I don't know how many millimeters, but they're certainly raised up. They're in that position that's neither too high nor too low, and one could say there's times when you wish they were lower and times when you wish they were higher. Again, the sports tourer class is a compromise, and as long as you accept that, that is what it is. It's a good motorway. Good motorway tourer in my opinion. You sit there just a bit out of the wind, not fully. The riding position is low enough to keep you out of the wind, as I say, but high enough for in traffic not to feel as if you're sat on the front wheel. The foot pegs, for me, I know they've been lowered on this again compared with the ST, so I wouldn't say the foot pegs were that low. Your legs are fairly bunched. I think also lowered the seat, so lowering the foot pegs and lowering the seat probably didn't alter the actual geometry of your leg to hip position too much. I've ridden an ST. I quite liked the height of it, but again, it's not really a touring bike. The handlebars, as I say, are a good position. The brake levers all in the right place, although not overly adjustable up and down because you've got the constriction of the various wiring and bits and bobs. The lever spans, to be honest, are not brilliant. It's quite a wide span to the levers, and the clutch is notably heavy on this bike, and a lot of people say it's normal. I think it's heavy, and that may well be as a result of the angle that my arms particularly sit. The screen on the GT SE, which is the model I have, is the sort of flip screen. I find it does present a certain amount of turbulence until you're going good speed, and by good speed I mean in excess of 70 miles an hour. Then it seems to smooth out a bit, but always it's a little bit noisy. Not catastrophic, and not enough for me to say I'm going to change the screen, which is something a lot of people do straight away. But yeah, it's just a little bit noisy on the helmet in my opinion. Now the other ergonomics I want to talk about are obviously the passenger space, which I really can't comment on because I've never taken a passenger. With the luggage on, there's a lot of support obviously. The rear footrests are relatively high, so any large person on the back would be fairly sort of cramped. But I think it's generally regarded as reasonably comfortable, probably greatly enhanced by the huge top box, which again the SE comes with, which has a back pad on it so you can sit back against it. The weight of the vehicle does that fall into ergonomics? So probably does in terms of how you ride it, because it will always be an issue. It's a fairly upright engine, fairly upright mass, and the weight is always going to be an issue. It's a heavy bike, 268 kilograms without the top box, I think, or two. Yeah, I think it's without the top box, fully fueled. I tend to, if I'm going away, as I say, it's only myself that rides it. In normal circumstances, I would not have, if I take it out for a jolly on a Saturday, I may not have any boxes on at all. The bike then becomes significantly lighter, 256 kilograms. Still heavy, but a significant difference is felt. It looks better with the side panniers on, in my opinion, but they are wide. And again, not really ergonomics, but when you're maneuvering the vehicle, they are wider than the rest of the bike. So that is always a bit of in the back of your mind, that whatever you think you can squeeze through, forget it, because you've got another sort of 6 inches. I've never had a problem, but a couple of times people have said to me, bloody hell, you were close to that post or car or whatever. And inevitably, I think if you ride one long enough with the rear panniers on, you're going to clip them. That's an inevitable sort of thing, but I suppose you just, to be fair, it's not happened, and I tend to ride it, as I say, when I go away, because of the weight, I tend to fill the side panniers with all my bits and bobs and leave the top empty. And the reason for that is, well, to say empty, a mobile phone or whatever in there. But when I stop, I tend to like to put my hat, my gloves, everything. Not everything, but hat and gloves. I can just put it in the top box and lock it, and that really makes it quite a joy. Surprisingly, you pull up for a cafe or anything like that, carting your helmet in is a pain in the neck. If you can just lock it in the top box, it makes life a lot easier. So that's how I tend to ride it. I occasionally will ride it with the top box on, and occasionally I'll ride it with just the side panniers on. As I say, because of the length of the bike and the framework on it, I tend to think that it looks better with the side boxes on from the side view. I say, as far as the ergonomics go, it's got heated grips, which are, yeah, they're okay. They work. They're not going to completely blow you away, but they work. The grips have a funny feel to them, not the most pleasant feel in your hand. And the switch for the heated grips is reminiscent of a 90s British-made car. It's a very, very basic looking switch, but that's, as I say, it works. At the price point of the bike, it's a what do you expect scenario. Other features, if we move on to the features of the bike, the Speedo cluster is again of its time. Obviously people say, oh, why can't you have this, why can't you have that? Well, you bear in mind that the bike was probably launched in 2010 or 11, but it's essentially taken the infrastructure from the old ST, which was probably launched 5 or 10 years before that, or designed probably 5 or 10 years before that. Well, 10 years it's probably designed. There's a lot of information on there, just the trips, fuel consumption, average, range, etc. All of which you have to toggle through on the dashboard, which by today's standards, people will hold up their hands in horror if you produced a bike today like that. But as I say, it's of its time, and it is there. To be honest, I don't toggle through anything. I tend to put it on whatever setting I feel like, you know, the fuel economy or the range, normally the range I think, and have the clock showing, and that's it. I just, you know, as long as I've got the clock, it'd be nice to have some things. Again, there are some things missing from the bike which are a bit of a bugbear, and I've remedied one of them with an addition, but the vehicle doesn't have hazard lights, which is just beyond me. But I don't think it's unknown. Motorcycles they seem to treat hazard lights as if they think about it, they put it on. I don't understand why not, but anyway. So if you are, and it's only happened to me once, if you are suddenly sort of parked in a position where you've had to stop because somebody's fallen off, broken down or whatever, in my case, I switched it to the park setting, which turns the side light on, and left an indicator on. That was the only thing I could do. So hazard lights would be nice. Obviously, again, of its age, gear change indicator. I've retrofitted one of these in a Helite kit, I think, which was, it sounds really strange, but it was one of my bugbears because I've had a couple of bikes with the gear change indicator on, an old BMW R1100 RT, and Pan-European, and I don't think the VFR had one, but I found myself forever going down the road, sitting on the motorway and pulling the clutch in, checking it was in top gear time and time again. So now I've got a gear indicator, and that has cured that problem for me. Again, it was almost at that point where I think, oh, do I change that or do I change the bike? And for what it did cost, it was, to me, a worthwhile addition, because I was embarrassing myself. Not that anybody else knew, but yes, I felt as if I was embarrassing myself. And occasionally you go down the motorway, of course, in fifth gear, and just suddenly you just sort of click it into top gear and think, blimey, I've just done 5 miles in fifth gear. But anyway, that's one of the additions I've made. Hazard lights, yes, a bit of an issue. It's very few things you'd sort of say, well, I need that. It's just convenience, and it's what you want. Of course, when you buy the new modern bikes with all the sophistication they've got, you've got so much stuff. It can take away the actual fact that you're riding a motorcycle, make it so easy. But for me, the gear change indicator was worthwhile. The only other thing I've changed on it was the exhaust pipe, the can, should I say, simply because the original one, and I was undecided on this. It was just at a point where I had a sort of, oh, shall I spend money on that or shall I not? And I kept riding the bike without the side bags on, and the exhaust, which is a standard exhaust, is a huge exhaust. Without the side panels on, side boxes on, it did just look disproportionate. If anybody's looked at the Kawasaki, I think the Americans call it the Concours, don't they? I don't know, can't think what we call it but the big touring Kawasaki, well-regarded bike. But it's got an exhaust that looks totally out of proportion to the rest of the bike. Extraordinarily long, and the Triumph was bordering on that. It's not unsightly until you actually sort of start washing the bike and standing back and looking at it, and it just looks 4 inches too long. And I went to the expense, if you like, of fitting a Scorpion can on, which doesn't make a great deal of difference noise-wise, maybe a little bit deeper, but it was significantly lighter. Has to be said that the standard can, I think, is about, I can say, 6 kilograms. It's a two-handed job to get off. It's heavy, and the Scorpion can is just a one-handed thing. I don't know, 1 or 2 kilograms, I expect, which I put on. In some respects, not wholly sort of enamored with it. You can't fit the heat shield on it, but in actual fact, when it's on the bike as a side profile, the bike looks quite neat and tidy with the Scorpion can on it, and it doesn't look. It's not a completely different colour, shape, or anything like that. It's good enough to sort of sit in there nicely. The only issues I had with fitting the Scorpion can were my initial bolt on was like, that's fantastic, it looks great, and I was going away about a week later, and I think I put the side panels on, I beg your pardon, the boxes on, and found that the Scorpion can was literally touching it, so you had to sort of, I'd angled it wrong when I put it on, so I twisted that round. Would I buy one again? Probably not. Now I've had one and that novelty's been and gone. There's not like a noise issue, it's just aesthetic. It's a little bit deeper, it makes a nice sound, but the standard pipe is quite a noisy bike. So the standard can is pretty acceptable if you can just live with the shape of it. Inconvenience of the panniers is there for anybody who reads any road tests. They're great, they shut well. The top box has power, although I find that to be a bit hit and miss because obviously it's plug-in power, cigarette lighter type power, but I've got a little USB converter because I found that if I bought a cigarette type thing to charge the phone, inevitably as the vibrations would knock it so as it was not charging. That's a great feature. You could put one of those little lights in there, like a cigarette. You get some little lights that go in a cigarette lighter. That would be something you could do if you so wished it. So I've never had any problem with the side panniers or the top box indeed leaking. There is a little storage compartment on the upper right hand side, which is somewhat frustrating because it doesn't, if you had a BMW or a Pan-European as I've had, you could put a finger and pop it open. The Triumph one, you have to put a key in it and literally take the lid off, so it's a bit of a sort of, I'll say an afterthought, but it doesn't sort of lend itself to being popped open to keep your telephone in or anything like that. It's lockable, so you undo the lock and you take the lid off. It's not even hinged, but it's there and it's quite reasonable. Put the toolkit in it or whatever you want, and that's a sort of a useful feature. Also has the Continental cigarette lighter point, and by that there's 2 sizes: the conventional cigarette lighter point, and then there's a little one, I can't think what it's called now, but on the left hand side, low on the fairing, which you can use for heated bike gear, which I tend to, or indeed you can run a USB point again up to the front for a mobile phone or something. I have a sat nav on mine which actually came with the bike. They came with a sat nav at that time. But I've got a little top box which is a Givy tank bag, one of these ring mounted tank bags, which is great because you can put a phone in there, and that's just, you know, phone your wallet in there, and that's handy, just a go-to, or some change indeed if you're abroad for tolls, or a credit card for the fuel station. But in that you can obviously run up a USB to it, so that's handy. That's the sort of things that make it a handy, useful bike when you're touring. And I know you can buy touring bikes with all this kit on them, but again, it's a price-led issue. As far as the riding of the bike goes, again, the ergonomics have sort of moved everything a little bit from the ST model, and it is more of a leisurely ride. It's a swift A road motorway road bike. B roads it gets a little bit flustered. We spent a few holidays in both Wales and the Pyrenees on it, and those really sharp little hairpins take a little bit of a forethought and a lot of back brake. The wheelbase alone just makes it a bit of a ball ache unless you manage it with the back brake. Like any big bike, you need to tuck it sometimes, and the back brake helps. It steers relatively slowly, not relatively, it steers slowly. There's no two ways about that. You can adjust that a little bit with suspension. I tend to ride mine with an extra 3 clicks, 10 clicks in, just to sort of up the rear a little bit. I've tried playing with the forks. You can stiffen the forks up, and I did try that, and it rode very much more in a sporting vein, but it destroyed the plushness of the ride. It became it differed significantly from the plushness of the ride. So I've brought that back to standard, which is I think three hoops up. Suspension travel is quite long for this sort of bike. It's got significantly longer suspension travel than some, and it is soft. It's on the soft side of soft. No two ways about that. Simply because of the way that the bike is designed. As I say, it's designed more on the touring bent than it is the actual sporting bent, and that makes the bike sometimes unwieldy, but in other times it's very stable. If you're sort of going around long sweeping bends, you just keep it pointed where it wants to go, and it doesn't flap itself about, even if you hit a few bumps and ripples and potholes. It will, as a consequence of the stretched wheelbase, I think, because the weight distribution has changed significantly, probably is fair to say, towards the front, pick up a little on road imperfections, tram lines. It will tram line on white lines and things like that. It sometimes picks it up and gives you, just sort of catch it a little bit. It's not a concern. Nothing ever feels dangerous, but it's just there. The tyres do make a vast difference. The original tyres went south very quickly, and then it became nasty. But the tyres I have on it now are Avon Sprint STs, I think they're called, and they've really reduced that to negligible amount. One of the big curses you'll find with it is it's got a very minimal steering lock, and that combined with the long length of it just makes it like a super tanker to turn in if you're in a car park trying to 3-point turn it. It can be a real problem to shuffle it backwards and forwards, and of course it's got a considerable weight, which doesn't help. But that's really there for sort of, again, it's that sort of bike that you can't really engineer re-engineer the whole thing and be designing a new bike. So it's one of those bikes that, like some cars, is really an evolution model. It's the way the ST evolved, and rightly or wrongly, for every good point there's a bad point. There must be some sort of law of diminishing returns on this sort of thing. If you improve one thing and you take away the benefits of some others. But it's a nice bike to ride, but it's not a sports bike. The beauty of the bike is always going to be the engine, it's a very sweet engine. Pulls strongly and smoothly from very low revs. It's not a rev happy engine. It runs a lot of torque, and the Triumphs tend to have this characteristic of being, so I would call it lazy, which is, I don't mean that in a bad way. It's like a lazy as in sort of, you could, third gear it will just tractor its way out of a corner without having to sort of bang down two gears. Now the VFR, I had a VFR, which is a fine motorcycle, better in many respects, but you were always searching for another gear when you're coming out of corners because you find yourself bogged down. The Triumph does not suffer from that. It certainly has a very superior drive. The down point of the engine, for all of that, and some would call this character, is that it feels relatively harsh. That may well be the way it's bolted to the chassis. It may well be the fact it's just an old engine design, but it's relatively harsh. I'm not saying vibration, but you feel it. It's a visceral sort of experience riding it. But yes, the engine has to be, is one of the things. It's one of the real saving points of the bike. The gearbox is, I'm going to say, okay, and it is relatively clunky, even between gear changes. It's not a smooth gearbox. So there we have it. That's the Triumph Sprint GT in its bad light. Obviously, I own one. I love the bike, and it's just a fact of life for these things. Similar for the Hayabusa. A lot of the problems of Hayabusa, it's a lovely smooth engine, but again, you've got the length, the weight, steering lock, all those things to factor in, and it's a case of knowing what you're getting into. For me, I'm perfectly happy with the bike. I've yet to see anything that really beats it. Probably the Kawasaki 1000, I don't know what model it's called, but the Kawasaki, and possibly the Suzuki, that's slightly different type of bike, the Suzuki GX SX 1000F. But that's going to have shortcomings in terms of luggage and what have you. As I say, I think today's offerings, the Kawasaki is probably top of the tree. Triumph got nothing in that class really. The BMW involves buying into the whole BMW package. It's not for me. But yes, the Triumph still ticks the boxes. If I've got to go to France or something like that, I look forward to it. Of course, there's everything you'd always say, oh, I had something else. When you're going down the motorway, you wish you were on a Pan-European. When you're in the mountains, you wish you're on a Ducati 996. But that's the way it is. That's why people collect motorcycles. As I say, it's a great bike, great value. And that's at the end of the day what you're talking about is value for money. Comparable prices today, yes, value for money bike. The Suzuki is still under £10,000. It's an incredible value for money, but there's compromises to be made there. So hopefully it'll be of help to somebody.